5:47 in the morning. A husband slips through the front door, shoes in hand, shirt still carrying the scent of another woman's perfume. His foot strikes something in the darkness. A toy, a small police cruiser. The one he bought his 5-year-old son to ease his own guilt. And at the end of the hallway, that little boy lies asleep on the couch, still clutching a story.
I told you this would happen if you didn't listen to me. This is all your fault.
But here is what the husband does not know.
You know exactly what
that
you
toy
did.
will become the evidence that destroys him. That little boy will speak the words that break him in a courtroom. And the wife he called boring, dependent, and irrelevant, she is about to become his worst nightmare.
I wouldn't want to start it with anyone else.
This is a story about betrayal, but not just any betrayal. This is about a woman who lost everything and rose from the ashes to take it all back. Stay with me until the end. I promise you, the final satisfying twist will be worth every single minute. The first light of dawn crept across the quiet Queens townhouse as Garrett Rhodes slipped his key into the lock, praying the hinges would not creak. His breath still carried the fading trace of expensive perfume, sharp and floral, the kind his wife Evelyn could never afford and he never should have known. 5:47 in the morning. The neighborhood slept peacefully, unaware that behind this particular door, a family was about to shatter. Garrett stepped inside, shoes in hand, shirt wrinkled from a night he swore he would never admit to. The house was dark except for a faint glow coming from the living room. He moved carefully, years of sneaking in after late nights having taught him which floorboards to avoid. Then his foot struck something. A sharp plastic clatter echoed down the hallway, loud enough to wake the dead. Garrett froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Right under his shoe lay a small police cruiser toy, bright blue with tiny scratches from hours of play. The one he had bought his son Caleb just last week with the excuse that he saw it in a store window and thought of him. The truth was far uglier. He had purchased it at 11:30 at night near the Plaza Hotel, guilt gnawing at his chest while Sloan Mercer waited upstairs. The toy sat abandoned in the middle of the floor like a tiny witness waiting for him. Garrett's eyes traveled down the hallway toward the living room. There, curled on the couch in dinosaur pajamas, 5-year-old Caleb slept with his small arms wrapped around a storybook. A lamp burned low beside him, proof that he had been awake far too late, waiting, hoping. The sight should have broken Garrett's heart. Instead, it only irritated him. Children needed boundaries. They needed to learn that adults had responsibilities, obligations, things more important than bedtime stories. A figure appeared in the doorway. Evelyn Rhodes stood there in her worn bathrobe, her hair messy from a long night of worry. Her eyes were puffy, not from sleep, but from exhaustion and something deeper. Something that looked dangerously close to knowing. She did not yell. She did not demand answers. She simply looked at his shirt buttons, done unevenly, 2 of them in the wrong holes. She always buttoned them for him when he rushed for work. He never made mistakes like that on his own. Her gaze rose slowly to meet his, and the pain behind her eyes cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Garrett swallowed hard. There was a crisis at the office, he said, keeping his voice steady. I had to stay late. I did not want to wake you. Evelyn's response was barely above a whisper. He waited for you. What? Caleb, she nodded toward their sleeping son. He waited for you, Garrett. You promised to read him the new book. He kept asking when Daddy would be home. He fell asleep on that couch at midnight, still holding the book, still believing you would walk through that door. Garrett shoved his hands into his pockets and his thumb brushed against something soft. A silk ribbon. Sloan's ribbon, the one she had been wearing in her hair before he pulled it loose. Panic shot through him like lightning, but he kept his hands down, his face neutral. He should not wait up, Garrett muttered, harsher than he intended. He knows I work late. He is 5 years old, Evelyn replied quietly. He only knows his dad did not come home. A beat of heavy silence hung between them. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint but haunting. The toy police cruiser on the floor might as well have been echoing it. Evelyn walked past him and gently lifted a blanket over Caleb's small body, tucking it around his shoulders with the tender care of a mother who had been doing this alone for far too long. We will talk later, Garrett, she said without turning around. When he is not here. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that meant something inside her had already cracked and was holding itself together by sheer willpower alone. Garrett's stomach twisted because for the first time, he realized the toy he had nearly crushed was not just plastic and paint. It was the first fracture in a lie big enough to destroy everything he thought he controlled. He climbed the stairs without another word, leaving Evelyn alone with their sleeping son and the growing weight of suspicion she could no longer ignore. In the living room, Caleb stirred slightly, his small fingers tightening around the storybook. On the cover, a cartoon father read to his cartoon son, both of them smiling. The title read, Adventures Before Bed. Evelyn looked at the cover, then at the empty stairs where her husband had disappeared. Some adventures, she thought bitterly, never make it past the first chapter. Morning sunlight filtered through thin curtains, painting soft stripes across the living room. To anyone walking past the windows, the Rhodes household looked perfectly peaceful. A small family getting ready for a new day, a husband heading to work, a wife preparing breakfast, a little boy humming as he played with his favorite toy. But inside, everything felt like glass about to shatter. Evelyn moved quietly through the kitchen, her hands steady even though her heart was anything but. She cracked eggs into a pan, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of cooking, the sizzle of butter, the warmth of the stove. Normal things, safe things. But Garrett's scent still lingered in her mind. Not the scent she knew, the clean aftershave he always used, but something else, something floral and expensive, something that did not belong to her. She washed her hands twice. The phantom smell would not leave. In the dining area, Caleb sat on his knees on a chair, rolling his police cruiser toy along the table edge, making quiet siren sounds with his mouth. "Mommy," he said brightly, looking up with eyes full of innocent hope. "Daddy is going to read the book tonight, right?" Evelyn forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We will see, sweetheart." Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Garrett appeared in a crisp white shirt and charcoal suit jacket, moving with the cool confidence of a man who believed he still controlled every narrative in his life. He grabbed his expensive pen from the counter, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and checked his reflection in the microwave door. "Big day," he announced, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. "VP nomination meeting this morning. Do not wait for me tonight." Caleb's face fell instantly. "But Daddy, what about the new book? You promised." Garrett barely glanced down at his son. "Another night, buddy." Evelyn watched the light dim in Caleb's eyes. She held her breath, hoping Garrett would at least kneel down, touch his shoulder, say something fatherly, give some small piece of himself to the child who adored him. He did not. Instead, his phone buzzed loudly from the counter. Garrett snatched it quickly, but not quickly enough. In that brief moment before he pulled it to his chest, Evelyn saw the name lighting up the screen. Sloan. Her stomach turned to ice. Garrett tucked the phone away with practiced casualness. "I will call you later," he told Evelyn, but his eyes would not meet hers. They never did anymore. He headed toward the front door without a kiss, without a hug, without any of the warmth that marriage was supposed to hold. Caleb scrambled off his chair and ran after him, tiny hands clutching the toy police car. "Daddy, you forgot to say goodbye." Garrett paused at the door, sighed like a man being asked to perform an exhausting chore, and crouched just enough to pat Caleb's hair. "Goodbye, champ." No real warmth, no genuine affection, just a transaction completed. The door clicked shut behind him, and silence filled the house like water flooding a sinking ship. Evelyn stood frozen, spatula still in hand, watching not the door but the empty space Garrett had left behind. A space that had been growing wider for months, maybe years. She had felt it happening, but convinced herself she was imagining things. Convinced herself that all marriages went through difficult seasons. But seasons changed. This felt permanent. "Mommy," Caleb tugged at her bathrobe. "Why did Daddy look so busy?" She forced another smile, this one harder to manufacture than the last. "Daddy has important work, sweetheart. Come eat your breakfast." As she turned back to the stove, her hand brushed against Garrett's suit jacket draped over a nearby chair. He had left it behind in his rush, which was unusual. Garrett was meticulous about his appearance. Her fingers found the pocket without meaning to. And there, folded neatly inside, was a small cloth printed with a familiar logo. Cartier. Evelyn's heart stopped. She did not own any Cartier jewelry. She never had. The most expensive thing Garrett had ever given her was the modest engagement ring she wore, purchased when they were young and hopeful and desperately in love. She pulled the cloth out and stared at it, her mind racing through possibilities. A gift for someone at work? A mistake from the dry cleaner? Or evidence of something she had been refusing to see? Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. A text message from her best friend Jessica Bennett appeared on the screen. "Coffee? I need to vent about my client whose husband claimed his emotional support mistress was tax deductible. I wish I was joking." Despite everything, Evelyn almost laughed. Almost. She tucked the Cartier cloth into her own pocket and began cleaning the kitchen with trembling hands. The truth was coming. She could feel it building like a storm on the horizon. She just was not ready to face it yet. That evening, after Garrett left for yet another meeting, the house settled into an uncomfortable quiet. Evelyn moved through her routine like an actress who had forgotten her lines, going through motions that no longer felt connected to meaning. She bathed Caleb, helped him brush his teeth, and tucked him into bed with his police cruiser toy resting on the nightstand where he could see it. "Mommy?" Caleb asked as she smoothed the blanket over his small body. "Yes, sweetheart. Why does Daddy smell different now?" Evelyn's hand froze mid-motion. "What do you mean?" Caleb's eyes were thoughtful in the way only children can be, observant without understanding the weight of what they observe. "He used to smell like soap, like the soap in our bathroom, but now he smells like flowers, like the lady at his office." Every muscle in Evelyn's body went rigid. She kept her voice carefully neutral, the way nurses learn to do when delivering difficult news. "What lady, sweetheart?" "The pretty one. She has yellow hair and she wears red dresses. She gave me candy once when Daddy brought me to work." Caleb yawned, his eyes growing heavy. "Daddy said not to tell you about the candy. He said it was our secret." Evelyn leaned down and kissed his forehead, hoping he could not feel how fast her heart was racing. "You can always tell Mommy anything," she whispered, "even secrets." "Okay, Mommy." Caleb's eyes fluttered closed. "I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in the whole world." She sat on the edge of his bed until his breathing grew deep and even, then slipped out of the room on legs that felt like they might collapse beneath her. The lady at his office. The one with yellow hair and red dresses. The one who gave her son candy and told him to keep secrets. Evelyn walked downstairs in a daze, her mind churning through months of late nights and missed dinners and excuses that had grown thinner and thinner until they were practically transparent. In the living room, Garrett's iPad sat on the coffee table. He had been using it that morning to check something before rushing out. Normally, Evelyn would not touch his devices. She respected his privacy the way she expected him to respect hers. But normal had ended the moment she found that Cartier cloth. The screen lit up when she touched it, and her breath caught. He had not logged out of his accounts. Everything was right there, open and accessible. Like the universe was handing her proof she had not asked for but desperately needed. A notification banner appeared at the top of the screen. Rideshare receipt, drop-off location, the Plaza Hotel, time 12:41 a.m. Evelyn's hands trembled as she began to scroll. More receipts appeared, stretching back months. Hotel stays she knew nothing about. Car services to addresses she did not recognize. Restaurant charges for meals she had never eaten. And then, buried among the mundane expenses, a receipt that made her stomach lurch. Cartier, one bracelet, $4,200. The date was 3 weeks ago. Garrett had told her he was at a client dinner that night. He had come home late, smelling of wine and steak, and she had believed every word. Evelyn kept scrolling, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. More hotels, more car services, more evidence of a double life conducted right under her nose while she stayed home, caring for their son and trusting the man she had married. 6 months, at minimum, 6 months of lies. She stumbled to the bathroom and vomited, her body rejecting the truth before her mind could fully accept it. When the heaving finally stopped, she gripped the sink and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked exhausted, defeated, old in ways that had nothing to do with age. "Who are you?" she whispered to her reflection. "When did you become someone who ignores every warning sign. But she knew the answer. She had become this person gradually, one small compromise at a time. She had given up her nursing career to raise Caleb. She had moved away from her friends to be closer to Garrett's office. She had handed over control of their finances because he insisted he was better with money. She had made herself dependent without realizing she was building her own cage. Her phone sat on the bathroom counter. She picked it up with shaking hands. "Document everything," whispered a voice in her head. The voice sounded like her mother, who had died 3 years ago, but whose practical wisdom lived on. Screenshots, dates, times. Your memory will fail you when you need it most. Your phone will not. Evelyn wiped her mouth, took a deep breath, and returned to the living room. For the next 2 hours, she methodically captured every piece of evidence she could find. She photographed the receipts. She screenshotted the rideshare records. She documented the hotel stays and the jewelry purchases and every other breadcrumb Garrett had carelessly left behind. By the time she finished, her phone held enough evidence to confirm what her heart had been refusing to accept. Her husband was having an affair, a serious, sustained affair, with a woman who wore red dresses and gave candy to children and cost more in jewelry than Evelyn's entire wardrobe. She sat in the dark living room, phone clutched to her chest, and let herself cry. Not for long. She could not afford to fall apart. Caleb needed her to be strong. But for a few minutes in the darkness, she mourned the marriage she thought she had and the future she thought awaited her. When the tears finally stopped, something else remained. Not acceptance, not yet, but readiness. Readiness to learn just how deep this betrayal ran. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision that would change everything. She would surprise Garrett at his office, not to confront him, not yet, but to see with her own eyes whether her suspicions were justified. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the receipts were wrong. Maybe she was misinterpreting everything. She dressed Caleb in his favorite shirt, the one with tiny dinosaurs, and told him they were going on an adventure. "We are going to visit Daddy at work," she said with forced cheerfulness. "Won't that be fun?" "Yeah," Caleb bounced excitedly. "Can I bring my police car?" "Of course you can, sweetheart." The subway ride into Manhattan felt surreal, like Evelyn was watching herself from outside her own body. The city rushed past the windows, millions of people going about their ordinary days, completely unaware that her world was balanced on the edge of a cliff. Mercer Financial occupied the upper floors of a gleaming Park Avenue tower. The lobby was all glass and marble, designed to intimidate anyone who did not belong. Evelyn had visited only twice before, both times for formal company events where she had felt distinctly out of place among the polished executives and their polished wives. She approached the receptionist with Caleb's hand gripped tightly in hers. "Hi," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "We are here to see Garrett Rhodes." The receptionist smiled politely, then glanced at her computer screen. Her expression flickered with something Evelyn could not quite read. "Mr. Rhodes is not in a meeting right now, but he did step out briefly." "Step out?" Evelyn repeated. "Do you know where?" Before the receptionist could answer, Caleb tugged hard on Evelyn's sleeve, pointing toward the enormous glass doors that led to the street. "Mommy, look! There is Daddy!" Evelyn turned. Through the glass illuminated by mid-morning sunlight, she saw two figures walking toward the curb. One was Garrett, his suit jacket slung over one arm, his posture relaxed in a way she had not seen in years. The other was a woman in a red dress, blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, moving beside him with the easy intimacy of someone who belonged there. They looked perfectly in sync. Too close. Too comfortable. Garrett leaned down and said something that made the woman laugh. A soft, confident laugh that carried even through the glass. The woman's hand brushed Garrett's arm in a gesture so natural it could only have been practiced hundreds of times. And then, as Evelyn watched with her heart shattering in her chest, Garrett reached out and tucked a loose strand of the woman's hair behind her ear. The exact gesture he used to do to Evelyn when they were dating. Before the stress, before the lies, before whatever this was, the woman leaned into him slightly, and for one terrible moment, the world went completely silent. No traffic noise, no lobby chatter, nothing except the sound of something cracking inside Evelyn's chest. "Mommy," Caleb's small voice broke through the numbness. Is Daddy hugging that lady? Evelyn could not answer. She could not breathe. Then Garrett's gaze lifted casually toward the building, and his eyes found them. Found his wife and son standing in the lobby like ghosts from a life he had clearly moved on from. His face drained of color. He dropped his hand from the woman so quickly she actually flinched. Evelyn! His voice carried through the doors as he rushed toward them. Wait, this is not what it looks like. But Evelyn was already backing away, pulling Caleb with her. The boy gripped her hand tightly, confused and frightened by the tension he could sense but not understand. The woman in the red dress did not follow. She simply stood on the curb, watching with a slow, knowing smile, as if to say, "You are too late." And in that terrible moment, the last thread of denial finally snapped. Evelyn had just witnessed the truth she had been afraid to face, and there was no going back to the comfortable lie of not knowing. The drive home was silent in the worst possible way. Not peaceful silence, not comfortable silence, but the crushing kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel like an accomplishment. Evelyn gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Caleb sat in his car seat behind her, clutching his police cruiser toy without making a sound. He did not understand what he had seen, but children sense things. They feel the vibrations of a world shifting beneath them, even when they cannot name what is happening. "Mommy," he finally whispered as they pulled onto their street. "Why was Daddy with that lady?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "Daddy works with lots of people, sweetheart." But he touched her hair. "Like he touches yours sometimes, from the mouths of babes," Evelyn thought bitterly. 5 years old and already more observant than she had allowed herself to be for months. The moment they stepped into the townhouse, Evelyn felt the wrongness immediately. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with electricity before a storm. She sent Caleb to his room to play, then stood in the kitchen, waiting. She did not have to wait long. 20 minutes later, the front door slammed open and Garrett stormed inside. His face was flushed, his tie loosened, and his eyes blazed with an anger that seemed wildly disproportionate for a man who had just been caught in a compromising situation. "What the hell was that, Evelyn?" he demanded, his voice low and venomous. She turned to face him, drawing on every ounce of strength she possessed. "What was what? Do not play games with me." He stepped closer, jabbing a finger in her direction. "Showing up at my office? Dragging Caleb along to spy on me? That was humiliating. Do you have any idea how that looked to my colleagues?" Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "Humiliating? Garrett, I saw you with her. I saw you laughing together, touching her, tucking her hair behind her ear. How long has this been going on?" He scoffed, loosening his tie further, as if the conversation was beneath him. "You saw a colleague, a business associate. We were discussing a client presentation." A client presentation. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "You buy jewelry for your clients now? $4,000 bracelets from Cartier?" Something flickered behind his eyes, fear, maybe, or the calculating realization that she knew more than he had anticipated. Then the mask slammed back into place. "You went through my things?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That is honestly pathetic, Evelyn. That is the behavior of a paranoid, insecure woman who has lost her grip on reality. The receipts, Garrett, the hotel stays, the ride share to the plaza at midnight. I have screenshots of all of it." His jaw tightened. "So you are a spy now, going through my private accounts, building some kind of case against me." He shook his head slowly. "This is exactly your problem. This is why we have been struggling. You are paranoid, unstable. You see problems where none exist." "Problems where none exist?" Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "I watched you touch another woman right in front of our son." Garrett stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, mixed with something floral that did not belong to her. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You know what your real problem is, Evelyn? You have become boring, predictable. You gave up your career, your identity, everything that made you interesting. Now you sit home all day, take care of the kid, wear the same damn cardigan 3 times a week." He gestured at her dismissively. "And you wonder why I need someone who actually stimulates me intellectually. Someone who understands ambition." Each word hit like a physical blow, but Evelyn refused to crumble. "I gave up my career for our family. For Caleb. For you. And look how far I have gotten. He spread his arms wide, encompassing their townhouse, their life, everything he had supposedly built. Do you think I got where I am with you weighing me down? Sloane understands what it takes to succeed. She pushes me to be better. Sloane. The name hung in the air between them, finally spoken aloud. Sloane Mercer, the CFO's daughter. Of course it would be someone with power, someone with connections, someone who could advance his precious career. Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. You promised us a family. You promised Caleb that you would be there, that you would be a father. Garrett's expression hardened into something she barely recognized. Promises change. People change. You will adjust. Women always do. The cruelty of it took her breath away. This was not the man she had married. Or maybe it was, and she had simply refused to see it until now. I want a divorce, she whispered. Garrett laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. A divorce, sweetheart? You can walk away from this marriage if you are too weak to handle real life. But let me be crystal clear about one thing. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her face. You will not take my son. Our son, she corrected automatically. Judges do not care about your feelings, Evelyn. They care about stability, income, status. I can provide all of that. You, he looked her up and down with obvious contempt. You can barely afford groceries without me. You do not have a job. You do not have savings. You do not have anything except what I have given you. You cut off my access to our accounts, she said, her voice trembling with rage. And I will do it again. He smiled coldly. Fight me, and I will drown you in court filings until you beg me for mercy. Until you hand over Caleb because you simply cannot afford to keep him. Evelyn felt the room spin around her. This was not happening. This could not be happening. The man she had loved, the father of her child, was standing in their kitchen, threatening to destroy her. Garrett straightened his jacket, apparently satisfied with the devastation he had wrought. Now, let us pretend this conversation never happened. I have work in the morning. He walked toward the stairs, pausing at the bottom step to deliver one final blow. Oh, and Evelyn, if you try to use those screenshots against me, I will make sure everyone knows exactly how unstable you have become. The office, the school, our families, everyone will know that you have lost your mind. Then he disappeared upstairs, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the kitchen, her world in ruins around her. She did not know how long she stood there. Minutes, maybe hours. The kitchen grew dark as the sun set outside, but she did not move to turn on the lights. Then she heard a small sound from the hallway. She turned. Caleb stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, his police cruiser toy clutched tightly against his chest. His eyes were wide with terror, his small body trembling. For the first time in his 5 years of life, he was not looking at his mother for comfort. He was afraid of his father. And in that moment, Evelyn realized something that changed everything. This was not just about her marriage anymore. This was not about betrayal or broken promises or shattered dreams. This was about protecting her son from a man who had just revealed exactly what he was capable of. 2 days passed after the confrontation, and the townhouse transformed into a war zone of cold silences and careful avoidances. Garrett came and went at odd hours, barely acknowledging Evelyn's existence. When they did cross paths, he looked through her like she was furniture. Caleb sensed the change. He became quieter, more clingy, carrying his police cruiser toy everywhere like a talisman against the bad feelings he could not name. Evelyn survived by focusing on routine. Breakfast, school, homework, bath, bedtime story. She kept her phone close, the screenshots saved and backed up in multiple locations. But she had no idea what to do with them. Garrett was right about one thing. She had no money, no lawyer, and no resources to fight him. Then, late one evening after Caleb fell asleep, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was spam. But something made her look. You do not know me, but I know your husband. Check the audio file attached. There is more where this came from. Below the text was a small audio icon. Evelyn's heart pounded as she pressed play. The recording was slightly muffled, as if captured from across a room, but the voices were unmistakable. Garrett's voice came first, confident and cruel. Evelyn is harmless. She is completely dependent on me. She will not leave because she cannot. I have kept all the accounts under my name. If she walks out with nothing. Then a woman's voice, smooth as silk. Sloan, and what about the kid? Garrett laughed dismissively. He will get over it. Kids adapt. Besides, once I lock down the VP promotion, I will have grounds to push for full custody. Evelyn cannot afford a custody fight. She does not even know where half our money is. Sloane's voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. And once you are VP? Once I am VP, we move forward. No more hiding. Garrett's tone shifted to something almost triumphant. And Evelyn becomes completely irrelevant. The recording ended. Evelyn sat frozen, her phone pressed against her ear, the words echoing in her skull. Completely irrelevant. She had known Garrett was capable of cruelty. The confrontation had shown her that. But hearing him discuss her like an obstacle to be removed, hearing him dismiss their son as an inconvenience who would simply adapt, it revealed a depth of calculation she had not imagined. Her phone buzzed again. There is more. He is not who you think he is. If you want everything, meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. Café Liberta, Brooklyn. Do not tell him. Evelyn stared at the message for a long time. Her mind raced through possibilities. A trap? A test? Some scheme Garrett had cooked up to prove she was paranoid? But what did she have to lose? He was already planning to take everything from her. If this mysterious stranger had information that could help, she had to take the risk. She typed a single reply. I will be there. Then she sat alone in the dark, listening to the recording again and again, each replay hardening something inside her that had been soft for too long. Café Liberta occupied a quiet corner of Brooklyn, tucked between a flower shop and a used bookstore. The kind of place where people came to think, to write, to escape. The scent of espresso and fresh pastries filled the air as Evelyn stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room for anyone who looked like they might be waiting for her. She spotted the woman immediately. Mid-40s, sharp eyes behind thin metal glasses, hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse. Professional but not flashy. She carried herself with quiet authority, like someone accustomed to boardrooms and difficult conversations. The woman looked up as Evelyn approached, nodding toward the empty chair across from her. Mrs. Rhodes, she said, thank you for coming. My name is Marion Cole. Evelyn sat down slowly, her guard up. You work at Mercer Financial. It was not a question. The recording had come from inside Garrett's world. It had to be someone with access. Marion nodded. Senior auditor. I oversee internal compliance reviews. Why are you helping me? Marion was quiet for a moment, her fingers wrapped around a coffee cup she had not touched. Because your husband is not just cheating on you, Mrs. Rhodes. He is committing fraud. Evelyn's breath caught. What? He has been funneling personal expenses through corporate accounts for months. Hotel rooms charged as client meetings. Car services billed as business travel. Even that Cartier bracelet was expensed as a client gift. Marion's voice remained steady, factual. If this continues, it will trigger a federal audit. The company could face serious consequences. So you are protecting the company. I am protecting a lot of people. Marion finally met her eyes directly, including you. Why should I trust you? Evelyn demanded. I do not know you. For all I know, this is some kind of setup. Marion reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the table. Because I have been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. My sister married a man like Garrett. Charming, successful, utterly ruthless. She did not get help until it was too late. She lost her children in the custody battle because she did not have proof of what he had been doing. Her voice wavered slightly before steadying again. I will not watch that happen to someone else. Not when I have the power to stop it. Evelyn opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were printed documents, highlighted transactions, hotel itineraries with Garrett's name on them, expense reports that clearly showed personal purchases disguised as business costs. This is enough to destroy his credibility in court, Marion said. But you have to be smart about how you use it. Do not confront him again. He will destroy the evidence or find a way to turn it against you. What do I do? Get a lawyer? A good one? Someone who specializes in high-asset divorces. Document everything he does from now on. And whatever you do, Marion leaned forward, her voice dropping, do not let him know you are coming. Men like Garrett do not fight fair. They fight first. Evelyn looked at the documents, her mind racing. There was enough here to change everything. But it also meant accepting that her marriage was truly over, that the man she had loved was a stranger capable of things she never imagined. There is one more thing, Marion said. Someone else knows about your situation. Someone who wants to help. Who? Lucas Whitmore. He contacted me this morning asking about you. The name sent a jolt through Evelyn's memory. Lucas Whitmore. 6 years ago, NYU emergency room. She had been a nurse then, exhausted at the end of a brutal shift when they brought him in with a cardiac episode. She had stayed 3 hours past her shift to monitor his recovery, something about his situation touching her in a way she could not explain. He remembered her. Marion stood, gathering her things. I have to get back before anyone notices I am gone. But Evelyn, she paused, looking down at her with something like compassion. You are stronger than you think. I have seen your personnel file from when you worked at the hospital. You were one of the best nurses they had. Do not let Garrett make you forget who you are. Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone with an envelope full of ammunition and the terrifying realization that she was no longer fighting alone. The next few weeks transformed Evelyn into someone she barely recognized. The woman who had accepted whatever Garrett gave her, who had silenced her own doubts to keep the peace, that woman was dying. In her place, someone harder was emerging. Someone who had finally learned to fight back. Her best friend, Jessica Bennett, agreed to represent her. Jessica was a divorce attorney, one of the best in the city, and she had been waiting years for Evelyn to finally see the truth about her marriage. I thought this day would never come, Jessica said during their first official meeting, spreading Marion's documents across her desk. Garrett always gave me the creeps. Too smooth, too polished. Men like that are hiding something ugly. He wants to take Caleb, Evelyn said quietly. He told me he would bury me in court filings until I gave up. Jessica's eyes hardened. Let him try. They built their case methodically. Evelyn recorded her conversations with Garrett, taking advantage of New York's one-party consent laws. She documented his absences, his threats, his financial manipulation. She tracked every dollar he spent on Sloan while claiming they could not afford to keep Evelyn on the joint accounts. And then she found the toy store receipt. She was searching through Garrett's home office, looking for bank statements, when she discovered it tucked beneath his expensive pen. A receipt from a toy store near the Plaza Hotel, dated the same night he had claimed to be at a client dinner. 2 police cruiser toys, identical, purchased at 11:27 p.m., one for Caleb and one for someone else. That night, while putting Caleb to bed, she asked him gently about the toy. Sweetheart, you remember when Daddy bought you this police car? Caleb nodded sleepily. He said he saw it in a window and thought of me. Did you ever see Daddy with another police car, one that looked just like yours? Caleb's small face scrunched with thought. Yeah, I saw him put one in his bag one night. He said it was for a friend. What kind of friend? A lady friend. Caleb yawned. He looked scared when he saw me watching. He told me not to tell you. But you said I could tell you anything, right, Mommy? Evelyn pulled him close, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. That is right, sweetheart. You can always tell Mommy anything. The first court hearing arrived on a gray November morning. Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table with Jessica beside her hands cold despite the heated courtroom. Garrett arrived with his own attorney, a man in a designer suit who looked like he charged more per hour than Evelyn's monthly grocery budget. Garrett himself radiated confidence, certain that his money and connections would carry the day. The judge, an experienced woman named Patricia Holloway, examined the evidence with careful attention. She listened as Jessica presented the financial records, the hotel receipts, the damning recording of Garrett discussing his plans to make Evelyn irrelevant. Garrett's lawyer tried to paint Evelyn as paranoid and unstable, but Judge Holloway was unmoved. Mr. Rhodes, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom, these expenses clearly do not match what you submitted in your financial disclosures. They are fabricated, Garrett insisted. his composure cracking slightly. Jessica rose calmly. Your Honor, these documents were obtained directly from Mercer Financial's internal audit system. They have been verified by senior compliance staff. Judge Holloway's expression hardened as she reviewed the papers. Mr. Rhodes, the evidence before me suggests a pattern of financial deception and potential coercion. I am awarding temporary custody to Mrs. Rhodes. Additionally, you are ordered not to restrict her access to marital funds. Any violation of this order will be treated extremely seriously. Garrett's face flushed purple with barely contained rage, but he said nothing. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. You did it, Jessica said, grinning. First round goes to you. I actually did it, Evelyn breathed. Now let us celebrate. I know a wine bar where they do not judge you for ordering the whole bottle before noon. Jessica, it is 2 in the afternoon, and? For the first time in months, Evelyn laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from deep in the chest. She had won. Garrett's armor had cracked. Maybe everything was going to be okay. She should have known better. That night, after tucking Caleb into bed, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a link from an unknown number. She opened it, and her brief moment of hope came crashing down. The article appeared on a Manhattan gossip blog known for targeting wealthy executives and their families. The headline screamed at Evelyn from her phone screen. VP nominee's unstable wife causes public meltdown. Sources say she broke into his office, stole documents. Evelyn read with mounting horror. The article painted her as a jealous, erratic woman who had ambushed her successful husband at his workplace, traumatizing their young son in the process. It quoted anonymous sources claiming she had a history of paranoid behavior, that colleagues had witnessed her screaming at Garrett in the lobby, that she was desperate for a financial payout she had not earned. Every word was a lie. Every word was designed to destroy her. The comments were even worse. Strangers calling her a gold digger, a manipulator, an unfit mother, people who had never met her, passing judgment on her entire life based on a few paragraphs of fabricated gossip. Her phone began exploding with texts from other mothers at Caleb's school. Is this true? Are you okay? I saw the article. I cannot believe it. Maybe you should take some time away from pickup. By morning, the social consequences had materialized. At school drop-off, mothers who had smiled at her for years now stepped away when she approached. Conversations stopped when she drew near. One woman whispered loudly enough to be heard, "Her husband's affair is all over the blogs. Can you imagine? I heard she screamed at him in front of everyone." Then Caleb ran up to her, his small face troubled. "Mommy, a boy said that Daddy does not love us. Is that true?" Evelyn knelt down and pulled him close, hiding her tears in his hair. "No, sweetheart. Daddy loves you very much." But the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. That evening, her doorbell rang. Evelyn opened it to find Diane Rhodes standing on her porch. Garrett's mother, the woman who had hugged Evelyn at her wedding and called her the daughter she never had. "Diane," Evelyn said, relief flooding through her. "Thank God you are here. I need to explain what is happening." Diane's expression was ice cold. "I read the article. It is not true. He has been having an affair. I have proof. My son told me everything." Diane stepped inside without being invited, her eyes sweeping the house with barely concealed disdain. "How you have been spiraling. The paranoia, the accusations. He is worried about you, Evelyn. We all are. Diane, please. I have documents, recordings. You have a vendetta." Diane's voice sharpened. "Garrett made mistakes. I know that. Men sometimes stray, but you do not destroy your family over it. You work through it. You stand by your husband. He is trying to take Caleb from me. Maybe that would be for the best." Diane's words landed like blows. "Caleb needs stability. He needs someone who is not struggling the way you clearly are." Evelyn felt the walls closing in around her. She had counted on Diane as an ally, someone who would see through Garrett's lies. Instead, Diane had chosen her son. "I will be testifying in court," Diane said, moving toward the door. "For Garrett." The door closed behind her. Evelyn stood alone in the hallway, the last of her support systems crumbling. That night, after hours of crying, she sat on Caleb's bed trying to summon strength she did not feel. "Mommy," Caleb asked, his innocent eyes searching her face, "are you the bad guy?" Her heart shattered. "What, sweetheart?" The kids at school said you made Daddy sad, and Grandma said you are sick. Caleb's lower lip trembled. Maybe if you said sorry, Daddy would come back, and we could be a family again. Evelyn pulled him close, tears streaming down her face. I do not want you to be the bad guy, Mommy, Caleb whispered into her shoulder. She could not even defend herself to her own son. She had hit rock bottom. There was nowhere left to fall. 3 in the morning, the darkest hour. Evelyn sat on the kitchen floor, an empty wine glass beside her, scrolling through the comments on the article that was destroying her life. Each cruel word was a knife sliding between her ribs. She had lost everything: her reputation, her mother-in-law, her son's trust in her. What was the point of fighting? Garrett had unlimited resources. He had connections. He had the kind of ruthless determination that destroyed anyone who stood in his way. Her finger hovered over his contact in her phone. Maybe she should just call him, apologize, surrender, let him win. What kind of life would that leave for Caleb? A father who saw him as a possession, a mother who taught him that giving up was easier than fighting. Her phone rang. She stared at the unknown number, thumb hovering over decline. But something made her answer. Mrs. Rhodes? A man's voice, warm and steady. This is Lucas Whitmore. The name pierced through her fog. Lucas Whitmore, the cardiac patient, the man she had stayed 3 extra hours to monitor because something about his frightened eyes had reminded her why she became a nurse in the first place. Do you remember me? He asked gently. Yes, she managed. NYU emergency room. 6 years ago, you saved my life that night. And then you stayed with me until I was stable, even though your shift had ended hours before. He paused. I never forgot that, Mrs. Rhodes. The kind of person who does that, who gives of themselves without expecting anything in return. That person deserves help when they need it. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. Why are you calling me? Because I heard what is happening to you, and I cannot fix it for you. No one can, but I can give you one piece of information that might help. What information? Your husband has a morality clause in his employment contract. I have a copy of the original document. If Mercer Financial becomes aware of his affair with the CFO's daughter, combined with the financial misconduct, he loses everything. His job, his credibility, his leverage against you. How do you know about this? I sit on the board of a foundation that works closely with Mercer's charity arm. People talk. And when I heard your husband's name connected to a scandal, I started paying attention. He paused. What you do with this information is up to you. But Mrs. Rhodes, Evelyn, do not give up. The world needs people like you, people who stay past their shift, people who care. He sent her a document, Garrett's original employment contract, with the morality clause highlighted. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me. Prove me right about who you are. He hung up. Evelyn sat in the darkness reading the contract. The morality clause was specific. Any conduct that brings disrepute to the company, including personal misconduct that becomes public knowledge, could result in immediate termination. Garrett's affair with Sloan Mercer was not just immoral. It was career suicide, if she could prove it. Something shifted inside her. Not hope exactly, something harder, something that had been dormant for too long and was finally waking up. She was done crying. She was done being the victim. She picked up her phone and called Jessica. It is 3 in the morning, Jessica answered groggily. I know. Evelyn's voice was steady, but I need you to wake up. We are not just fighting anymore, Jess. We are going to war. The next few weeks, Evelyn transformed. She did not wait for allies to save her. She became her own champion. She contacted the gossip blog directly, threatening a defamation lawsuit with evidence that every claim in their article was false. Within 48 hours, the article quietly disappeared. She reached out to other mothers at Caleb's school, not to beg for understanding, but to ask questions. 2 of them, it turned out, had husbands who used the same corporate expense tricks Garrett did. Shared experiences created solidarity. Suddenly, Evelyn had witnesses willing to testify about the culture of deception at Mercer Financial. She applied to renew her nursing license. She had let it lapse when she left work to care for Caleb, But the credentials were still valid with some refresher courses. For the first time in years, she had a path to financial independence that did not depend on Garrett. And she studied the morality clause until she knew every word by heart. Jessica watched her transformation with growing admiration. "You are not the same woman who walked into my office a month ago. That woman was waiting for someone to save her," Evelyn replied. "I am done waiting." The invitation came when Evelyn least expected it. Sloan Mercer wanted to meet. The message was polite but unmistakably commanding. "An upscale restaurant in Manhattan. Tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Evelyn considered refusing, but something told her that understanding Sloane's angle could be the key to everything. She arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in the most professional outfit she owned. The restaurant was the kind of place where a glass of wine cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the quiet murmur of money discussing money. Sloane was already seated, a glass of sparkling water untouched before her. She was beautiful in the polished way of women who had never worried about bills or calories or whether their husbands were lying to them. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves. Her red dress probably cost more than Evelyn's car. "Mrs. Rhodes," Sloane smiled without warmth. "Thank you for coming." Evelyn sat down, keeping her expression neutral. "What do you want?" "Straight to business." "I respect that." Sloane folded her manicured hands on the table. "I want to offer you a deal." "I am listening." "Walk away quietly. Do not mention Garrett's conduct to the board. Do not make this a scandal that drags through the courts for years." Sloane's smile widened. "In exchange, I will personally ensure you receive full custody of Caleb. No fight. No drama, plus a generous settlement that will keep you comfortable for a very long time." Evelyn felt the temptation. This was everything she wanted. Her son, her freedom, financial security. Why would you do that? Because Garrett's usefulness has expired. Sloane shrugged elegantly. "He was entertaining for a while, but he has become a liability. However, I would prefer to manage his exit quietly rather than have the company dragged through public scandal. You get your son, I get my clean slate, everyone wins. What happens to Garrett? He gets reassigned, demoted, quietly managed out, no public disgrace. He lands on his feet somewhere less prestigious. Life goes on, so he faces no real consequences. He faces reality." Sloane raised an eyebrow. "Is that not enough?" Evelyn thought about everything Garrett had done. The threats, the manipulation, the lies told to their son, the way he had made Caleb afraid of his own father. "No," she said quietly. Sloane's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "He threatened to take my child. He called me boring, dependent, worthless. He made my 5-year-old son afraid of him." Evelyn met Sloane's eyes directly. "He does not get to walk away with his dignity intact." Sloane's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake." "Maybe, but it is my mistake to make." She stood up, leaving Sloane sitting alone amid crystal and white linen. "See you in court," Evelyn said, and walked out without looking back. 24 hours later, everything collapsed. Evelyn came home to find a letter from her bank. Her account had been frozen. Garrett had filed an emergency claim alleging she had accessed funds fraudulently during the separation. She could not pay rent. She could not buy groceries. She could not even fill her car with gas. Before she could process that disaster, her phone rang with worse news. Her nursing license renewal had been delayed. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint questioning her mental fitness to practice. Anonymous. But she knew exactly who. Then came the worst blow of all. Jessica called, her voice strained. "Evelyn, I need you to come to the courthouse right now." Garrett filed an emergency motion. "What kind of motion?" His lawyer presented text messages claiming you conspired with corporate insiders to steal confidential documents. "The judge has temporarily suspended your custody pending investigation." Evelyn's legs gave out. She caught herself on the kitchen counter, her vision swimming. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jessica said quietly, "that Caleb has been placed with Garrett until this gets sorted out." The world stopped turning. "No, no, no, no. Those texts are fabricated. He forged them." "I know, and we will prove it." But Evelyn, right now, he has Caleb. She hung up and screamed. The sound tore from somewhere deeper than her throat, from the place where mothers keep their most primal terrors, her son, her baby, in the hands of a man who had never seen him as anything more than a possession. She screamed until her voice gave out. Then she sat on the floor of her empty kitchen and tried to figure out how to breathe. 2 days passed, the longest 2 days of Evelyn's life. Without Caleb, the house felt like a tomb. His toys sat untouched. His bedroom door stayed closed because seeing his empty bed was more than she could bear. Jessica worked around the clock, analyzing the text messages Garrett had submitted as evidence. The metadata was wrong, she insisted. The timestamps did not match. If they could prove the messages were fabricated, they could overturn everything. But proving took time, and every hour that passed was an hour Caleb spent with his father. The doorbell rang on the evening of the second day. Evelyn opened it, expecting Jessica with an update. Instead, she found Diane Rhodes. "Come to gloat?" Evelyn asked bitterly. Diane looked different, smaller somehow. The self-righteous certainty that had armored her during their last conversation was gone, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like shame. "I came to apologize," Diane said quietly. Evelyn stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside to let her in. They sat across from each other in the living room, the space between them heavy with everything unsaid. "I went to Garrett's apartment last night," Diane began, "to bring Caleb dinner. He had not been eating well, and I thought some of Grandma's cooking might help." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "What did you see?" Evelyn asked. "Sloan was there." Diane's voice trembled. She and Garrett were arguing. He was begging her for something. Money, support, I do not know. And she was laughing at him. She called him pathetic. She said he was never part of her real plan. The words hung in the air. And Caleb, Diane continued, her eyes filling with tears, was sitting in the corner of the room, crying. "He kept asking for you, and Garrett, my son, did not even notice. He was so focused on that woman that he completely ignored his own child's tears." She looked at Evelyn with an expression of raw devastation. "My son is not the man I raised. Or maybe he is, and I have spent years refusing to see it." Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take time. But understanding. "Why are you telling me this?" Diane reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Because I recorded it, all of it. The argument, Sloan laughing, Garrett ignoring Caleb. I did not know why I was recording at the time. I just knew something was wrong." She handed the phone to Evelyn. "I cannot undo what I said about you. I cannot take back the way I treated you. But I can give you this, and I can testify in court against my own son." Evelyn took the phone with trembling hands. The video was clear, damning, exactly what they needed. "Why did you change your mind?" Evelyn asked. "Because I watched my grandson cry for his mother while his father did nothing." Diane wiped her eyes. "And I realized that protecting Garrett means destroying Caleb. And I will not do that, not even for my own son." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Evelyn said something she never thought she would say to this woman. "Thank you," Diane nodded, gathering her things to leave. "Bring him home, Evelyn. Bring my grandson back to where he belongs." "I will," Evelyn promised. "Whatever it takes." The final custody hearing took place on a December morning that felt colder than any Evelyn could remember. Snow threatened but did not fall, leaving the city wrapped in gray anticipation. She entered the courtroom with Jessica beside her and Marion Cole in the gallery as a supporting witness. Lucas Whitmore had sent flowers that morning with a note that simply said, "Today, you prove who you are." Garrett arrived with his expensive lawyer, but something had changed. The arrogant confidence that had carried him through every confrontation was cracked now, uncertainty leaking through. Sloan Mercer was notably absent. Judge Holloway called the proceedings to order. Jessica presented Diane's recording first. The courtroom fell silent as Garrett's voice filled the space, desperate and pathetic, begging Sloan for support while his son cried in the background. "I do not care about the kid right now, Sloan," Garrett's recorded voice pleaded. "I need that VP position." Sloan's voice cut through like ice. "You were never getting VP. You were a placeholder until I found someone competent. You used me, obviously." Sloan's laugh was cruel. You were useful for a while. Now you are just embarrassing." The recording ended. Garrett sat frozen, his face draining of color, as he watched his carefully constructed world collapse. "Your Honor," Jessica continued, "we also have evidence that Mr. Rhodes fabricated the text messages he submitted to this court as proof of conspiracy." She presented the forensic analysis. The metadata showed the messages were created after the filing date. They were forgeries, manufactured to frame Evelyn for crimes she never committed. Judge Holloway's expression hardened into stone. "Mr. Rhodes, do you have anything to say?" Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the courtroom for help that was not coming. The gallery doors opened. Caleb walked in, holding his police cruiser toy. Evelyn's heart stopped. She had not expected this, had not planned for it. But there was her son, small and brave, walking toward the front of the courtroom. "Your Honor," Jessica said carefully, "we have one additional witness." The child himself asked to speak. Garrett lunged halfway out of his chair. "What is this? He is 5 years old. He cannot testify." "Mr. Rhodes," Judge Holloway said sharply, "sit down." Garrett fell back into his seat, helpless. The judge addressed Caleb gently, the way one speaks to a small creature that might startle. "Hello, Caleb. Do you know why you are here today?" Caleb nodded solemnly. "To tell the truth, can you tell me about the toy you are holding?" Caleb looked down at the police cruiser in his hands, scratched from hours of play, worn from months of clutching it for comfort. "Daddy bought two," he said. "One for me, one for the flower lady." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. "Daddy said it was our secret." Caleb's voice was small but clear. "But secrets that make Mommy cry are bad secrets. And Mommy has been crying a lot." Judge Holloway nodded gently. "Is there anything else you want to tell me, Caleb?" The boy looked at his father. For a moment, his face held only sadness, the bewildered grief of a child who has lost something he cannot name. "You promised to read the book, Daddy." Caleb's voice wavered but did not break. "You always promise, but you never come. And I keep waiting, and you never come." Silence. Garrett's composure finally shattered. "Caleb, buddy, I can explain." But Caleb had already turned away. He walked across the courtroom, past the lawyers and the judge and the observers, and climbed into Evelyn's lap. "I want to go home with Mommy," he said into her shoulder. "Daddy yells at the phone all the time. He does not see me." Evelyn held him tight, her tears falling freely, not caring who watched. Judge Holloway took a long moment to compose herself before speaking. "Based on the evidence presented today, including financial manipulation, document forgery, and the testimony of the child, I am awarding full custody to Mrs. Evelyn Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes will have supervised visitation only, pending further review." She paused, her gaze settling on Garrett with unmistakable contempt. "Additionally, I am referring Mr. Rhodes' conduct to the district attorney for potential fraud charges. The fabrication of evidence is a serious crime, Mr. Rhodes, and it will be treated as such." Garrett slumped in his chair, a broken man realizing that everything he had schemed and lied and manipulated for was gone. As he was escorted from the courtroom, he passed close to Evelyn. "You think you won?" he hissed. "You are nothing without me." Evelyn looked at him calmly, her son safe in her arms. "No, Garrett, you are nothing without me. You just never realized it." 1 month later, Evelyn stood at the kitchen window of their Queens townhouse, watching snow finally fall outside. The house felt different now, warmer. The oppressive weight that had filled every room during her marriage had lifted, leaving space for something new to grow. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thought you would want to see this." Attached was a news article. The headline read, "Mercer Financial CFO's daughter under investigation for insider trading." Marion Cole had forwarded evidence of Sloane's own misconduct. The woman who had laughed while a child cried was finally facing consequences of her own. "Looks like karma is not just a concept," Jessica added with a string of celebration emojis. Evelyn smiled, her first genuine smile and longer than she could remember. "Mommy!" Caleb ran into the kitchen, his police cruiser toy clutched in one hand. "It is snowing! Can we make a snowman?" "Absolutely, sweetheart." She crouched down to his level. "Let me get your coat." As she helped him bundle up, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked different. Not younger, not prettier, but something better. She looked like herself again. The woman she had been before Garrett convinced her she was not enough. She had gone back to nursing. The license renewal went through once Garrett's anonymous complaint was exposed as fraudulent. 3 days a week at a local clinic, helping people, making a difference, earning her own way. The work was harder than she remembered, but it filled something inside her that had been empty for too long. Caleb tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, come on!" They went outside together into the pristine white world that had transformed their ordinary street into something magical. Caleb immediately began gathering snow, his laughter echoing off the houses. Evelyn was helping him roll a snowball when a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the yard. Lucas Whitmore walked toward them, hands in his coat pockets, snow dusting his dark hair. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said. "Lucas!" Caleb ran over and hugged his legs. "Are you here to help build our snowman?" Over the past month, Lucas had become a quiet presence in their lives. Not pushy, not presumptuous, just there. He had stopped by a few times to check on them, always bringing small gifts for Caleb. Books about trucks, a stuffed dinosaur, a pack of crayons. He had never asked for anything in return. "I brought hot chocolate," Lucas said, holding up a thermos. Figured snowman building requires fuel. They built the snowman together, all three of them. Caleb insisted on giving it a carrot nose and rock buttons and a scarf from his own collection. When it was done, they stood back to admire their creation. "He looks happy," Caleb declared. "He does," Evelyn agreed. "What should we name him?" Caleb thought hard, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Officer Snowy, because he protects the yard." "Perfect," Lucas said, grinning. Later, after Caleb went inside to warm up, Evelyn and Lucas stood on the porch watching the snow continue to fall. "You did not have to come," she said quietly. "I know. Then why did you?" Lucas was silent for a moment. "Because 6 years ago, you stayed with a stranger who was scared and alone. You did not have to do that either. But you did." He turned to face her. "I guess I have spent the last 6 years hoping I would get a chance to be that person for someone else." Evelyn felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not the desperate, all-consuming love she had felt for Garrett in the beginning. Something different. Something steadier. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked. Lucas smiled. "I would like that." That night, after Caleb was in bed and Lucas had gone home, Evelyn sat in the living room with a cup of tea and a thought she could not shake. She had spent so many years believing that safety meant depending on someone else, that love meant shrinking herself to fit into the spaces another person allowed, that a good wife was a quiet wife, a compliant wife, a wife who never made waves. She had been so wrong. Safety was not dependence, it was capability. The knowledge that she could stand on her own 2 feet, support her son, build a life without anyone's permission. Love was not shrinking, it was growing. Finding someone who made you more of yourself, not less. And a good wife, a good partner, a good person, was someone who knew their own worth and refused to accept anything less than they deserved. She thought about Caleb asleep upstairs, his police cruiser toy on the nightstand where it always rested. That toy had started as a symbol of Garrett's guilt, purchased in the middle of the night while he betrayed his family. But somewhere along the way, it had transformed. Now it was evidence of her son's resilience, his ability to love something despite its complicated origins. Maybe that was true of all of them. The next morning, Evelyn woke to sunlight streaming through her window and Caleb's voice calling from the kitchen. "Mommy, I am making you breakfast." She hurried downstairs to find her son standing on a step stool, carefully arranging cereal and a banana on a plate. "I made it myself," he announced proudly, "because you always make breakfast for me. So today I wanted to make breakfast for you." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears this time. "This is the best breakfast I have ever seen," she said. "Thank you, sweetheart." They ate together at the kitchen table, the morning light making everything feel soft and new. "Mommy?" Caleb asked between bites of banana. "Yes, sweetheart. Are we happy now?" Evelyn looked at her son, at his innocent eyes full of hope, at the future stretching out before them both. "We are getting there," she said. "Every single day, we are getting a little bit happier." Caleb nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then he returned to his cereal, humming a song he had learned at school. Evelyn watched him and felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not a conclusion, but a beginning. The start of a story she would write herself, one page at a time, with no one else holding the pen. Outside the window, the snow from yesterday had begun to melt, revealing patches of green beneath. Spring would come eventually, the way it always did, and when it arrived, Evelyn would be ready. 6 months later, Brooklyn Bridge Park sprawled green and golden beneath the late spring sun. Evelyn walked along the waterfront path with Caleb running ahead, his faithful police cruiser toy clutched in one hand. "Look, Mommy!" Caleb pointed toward a cluster of boats on the river. "Are those pirates?" Evelyn laughed. "I do not think so, sweetheart. But maybe we can pretend they are." She wore scrubs beneath her jacket, just off shift from the clinic. The work was demanding but fulfilling, and her colleagues had become friends. She had a life now that belonged entirely to her, built brick by brick from the rubble of everything she had lost. A figure approached from the opposite direction on the path. Lucas walked toward them with 2 cups of coffee in his hands, smiling when he spotted them. "One for the hero, nurse," he said, handing her a cup, "and 1 hot chocolate for the hero's sidekick." Caleb grabbed the hot chocolate eagerly. "Thanks, Lucas. I am not a sidekick, I'm a partner." "My apologies, partner." They walked together along the water, the 3 of them, not a family in any traditional sense, but something just as real. Something built on choice rather than obligation, on respect rather than control. Lucas had been patient over these months, never pushing, never demanding, simply present, a steady warmth that asked for nothing except the chance to keep showing up. Last week, he had asked Evelyn if she might like to have dinner sometime. Just the 2 of them. She had said yes, not because she needed someone, because she wanted someone. And wanting, she had learned, was very different from needing. "Mommy," Caleb said, tugging at her hand, "can we sit on our bench?" They had claimed a particular bench overlooking the river. Their bench. The one where they came every Sunday to feed the birds and watch the boats and simply be together. "Of course, sweetheart." They settled onto the bench, Caleb between them, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water. Evelyn thought about everything that had led her here. The betrayal, the breakdown, the long climb back to herself. She thought about Garrett, stripped of his job and his reputation, facing fraud charges that would follow him for years. She thought about Sloane, her own schemes catching up to her at last. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who believed that love meant sacrifice, that marriage meant surrender, that being a good wife meant being small. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Mommy?" Caleb asked. "Yes, sweetheart? I'm glad you are not sad anymore." She pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, the warmth of his small body. "Me too, baby. Me too." Lucas caught her eye over Caleb's head and smiled. Not a demanding smile, not an expecting smile, just a smile that said, "I am here. I am not going anywhere. And I think you are remarkable." She smiled back. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a boat horn sounded. Caleb pointed excitedly at a seagull diving toward the water. Everything was ordinary. Everything was extraordinary. And Evelyn realized something that she wished she could tell every woman who was where she had been. Every woman trapped in a marriage that made her small. Every woman who believed she could not survive alone. The hardest part is not the leaving. The hardest part is believing you deserve better. Once you believe that, once you truly believe that, nothing can stop you from building the life you were meant to have. She looked at her son, at the man beside her, at the city gleaming across the water. She had lost everything. And in losing everything, she had found herself. That, she decided, was the only revenge that really mattered. If this story touched something inside you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear that their next chapter can still be beautiful. Because it can. I promise you, it can. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are never as stuck as you feel. You are never as broken as you fear. And you are never, ever alone. Until next time. And that is where our story ends, my friend. If Evelyn's journey moved you, if it made you feel something real, I have one small favor to ask. Hit that like button. It only takes a second, but it means everything. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to fight for yourself when no one believed in you? Share this with someone who needs to hear that their next chapter can still be beautiful. And if you have not already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thank you for being here. You are not alone. And your comeback story, it is just beginning.